I tested all Warpaints Historical paint sets, including the WWII sets. And there are a few things you need to know before you buy. Are these solid, well-composed paint sets? Are the colors worth picking up even if World War II isn't your hobby focus? How much overlap is there with the Fanatic core range, and what's actually new? I've got the full briefing for you in this video. Privates, 3 things on the agenda today. First, I'll walk you through how these sets are put together and what to watch out for if you already own some Fanatic paints. Then, we'll go into the field as I paint a miniature using only the historical paints from the sets and share my thoughts along the way. And third, you get my honest verdict. With my channel, I want to help you find the best miniature paints for your painting style and skill level, and at the end I'll tell you who I would recommend the historical paints for and who I wouldn't. By the way, I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters. I've spent over 2 decades painting Warhammer and tabletop miniatures, and I made it my mission to review every new hobby paint range. I also maintain this library of professional, hand-painted color swatches for you to download, the Stahly Swatch system. Please like and subscribe if that's what you need. So the first 3 historical paint sets arrived in May 2025. World War II British, German and American Army. Now, a year later, 4 more sets followed. Soviet Union, Imperial Japanese, plus 2 smaller expansion sets for the British 8th Army and German Afrika Corps. Let's crack one of these sets open. Excluding the smaller expansion sets, each box contains 20 Warpaints Fanatic colors. These are a mix of existing colors from the core Fanatic range and new and exclusive paints. The new colors were developed in collaboration with historian Dr. Stephen Ball and verified for historical accuracy. Beyond that, the box contains nothing else. No brushes or miniatures. The included booklet is a little dated and doesn't reference the historical range, but the Army Painter YouTube channel does have a few painting tutorials to make up for that. When it comes to the contents, there's one thing you need to pay close attention to, especially if you already own Fanatic paints. Here's what. The 4 washes, steel, the rust effect paint, matte black and white, rifle brown and the red are the same for the first 3 sets. The Soviet and Japanese sets from Wave 2 have 1 or 2 variations, but essentially they share the same selection. Of those 10 recurring paints, Rifle Brown is the only new color, everything else is taken from the core Fanatic range. To make it more confusing, the red carries a different name depending on the set, but it's the same color as pure red. Except for the Soviet set, which has a slightly darker red. It's a bit of an eccentricity of the Army Painter to give existing colors new names for the licensed paint sets, though at least the original name is printed in small text on the label. The other 10 colors per set are unique and include at least 1 color triad of 3 matching paints for each army's combat dresses. More on that in a moment. And then we have the expansion sets for the British 8th Army and German Afrika Corps. These contain a selection of 10 colors rather than 20 and are designed to complement the larger British and German sets without any duplicates. Right, let's run these paints through boot camp. What are the strengths and weaknesses of war paints and what's the deal with these triads? I'll show you now on a model. While I didn't have a bolt action or World War II figure to hand, I do have this Death Corps of Creek Trooper, which works just as well for demoing all the techniques. I'm not usually one for painting Warhammer minis in historical color schemes, but will make an exception for the sake of this video. As you can see, I've primed the model with black spray primer. As I mentioned, each army set includes at least 1 triad for the combat dresses. 3 coordinated colors for shadows, base coat and highlights. In the German set, those are Dark Feldgrau, Mid Feldgrau and Light Feldgrau. I start the long coat with a base coat of Dark Feldgrau. The historical paints share the same formula as Warpaints Fanatic. The consistency is usually a little on the thick side, so you should add a drop of water. Once thinned, the paints apply well without obscuring details and covering power is generally excellent. 2 thin coats and the base coat is done. As you can see, Warpaints have a slightly satin finish. To shade the uniform, I'm trying out the dark tone wash, which comes in each of the 20 color army sets. I apply it straight from the bottle all over the coat, not being too sparing so the wash can flow nicely into the recesses. I pick up any excess with a dry brush to prevent pooling. Here's the result. Warpaints washes find the recesses well, though I do wish they were a little more matte, as the finish here is also on the satin side. Thanks to the thicker consistency and strong covering power, Warpaints are also very well suited for dry brushing. After brushing over the entire uniform with dark felt grau to even out some of the texture left by the wash, I bring out the details with another round of dry brushing, this time using mid felt grau. For dry brushing, I'd recommend brushes with a round, dome-shaped head. I prefer synthetic brushes like the Teclon Tiger dry brushes from Chronicle. The Army Painter's Masterclass dry brushes also work, though I find them a bit pricey for the quality. Finally, I do a gentle pass with light felt grau, focusing on the hems and sharp folds of the coat. Now, I want to push the dry brushed highlights further with some manual edge highlights. I thin light felt grau slightly so it flows better from the brush. This is where one of the Warpaints Fanatic range's weaknesses becomes apparent. The flow properties of the lighter paints aren't that great. Thinned with water, the paint breaks up easily so the pigments don't distribute evenly anymore. This is likely down to the high proportion of white pigment in these lighter colors. On top of that, the paints dry comparatively quickly on the brush, which doesn't help with flow at all. I'd strongly recommend using the Warpaint stabilizer for thinning when highlighting. It does make things a bit easier. Now, to be clear, layering, highlighting and glazing with Warpaint Fanatic isn't impossible. But there are plenty of other paint brands that stay more cohesive when thinned and offer a longer working window. For example, Pro Acryl, Vallejo Game and Model Color, AK 3rd Gen and Ionic, just to name a few. I'll test the metallic and effect paints for you in a moment, but first, here's the finished long coat, painted with a triad from the German paint set. A dark grey-green field grey consistent with the German Wehrmacht, verified by expert Dr. Stephen Bull. Though it's worth noting that you can't really pin combat gear from this period down to a single color with complete accuracy, as wartime production always varied depending on available raw materials and manufacturing facilities. Let's check out the triads from the other sets next. The British paint set gives you a khaki triad, and the 8 Army expansion set shifts that khaki to an even sandier tone. The Soviet set also comes with a khaki uniform triad, though leaning a little more olive. The Imperial Japanese set even features 2 triads, as does the German Afrika Korps set. Of all the sets, however, the American paint set triad departs from the norm. The colors in all the other triads sit chromatically in line with each other, basically the same base tone taken from dark to light. But medium drab from the US set is noticeably more olive than the more neutral dark drab and light drab. The Army Painter's tutorial video doesn't address this, and when I asked, I was told the shift in color was intentional. Perhaps there's a historical reason behind it. Let me know in the comments if you have any idea. But it gets even more peculiar. Dark drab from the US triad is identical to dark Feldgrau from the German set, despite having a different name. And light drab is taken straight from the core range, where it's known as olive drab. If all of this sounds a bit confusing, I recommend consulting my Warpaints Fanatic color swatch. It contains professional, hand-painted reproductions of the entire Warpaints Fanatic range. The historical paint set colors are broken down on a separate chart with clear markings of which colors are new and unique and which colors have an exact match with the core range. Perfect for planning your next color scheme. You'll find the Fanatic swatch for a small donation on my Patreon, and if you already have it, the latest historical update is free. Now, let's test the metallics and that rust effect paint. I base coat the bare metal with steel, one of the core range colors which is included in every of the larger sets. The Fanatic metallics are genuinely pretty good. Not the very best on the market, but well up there. Covering power is excellent and the metallic particles are relatively fine. 2 thin coats are all you need. After that, I bring out the dark tone wash again to shade the steel. Now, the rust effect paint Also taken from the Fanatic core range, is a bit different, so let me show you how to get the best out of it. Straight from the bottle, it's fairly thick, so I'd recommend thinning it with a Fanatic wash medium or water to a milky consistency. Then apply it in thin layers wherever you want rust to appear, ideally in recesses where moisture would naturally collect. Be careful not to flood the model. Let it dry, then repeat 1 or 2 more times in selected spots to build up the rust effect. As you can see, the paint creates a little bit of texture with a supple oxidation effect that looks really convincing. The rust effect is a great addition to any collection, and I also really like the realistic orange-brown hue. Right, but what's actually new in the historical range beyond the combat dress triads? Well, each set comes with a good number of newly developed colors tailored specifically to each army, including plenty of neutral tones. And most importantly, new browns. Despite the core Fanatic range having over 200 colors, I've always felt it's missing a few good warm browns. The Fanatic browns are all fairly flat and desaturated, especially those ruddy brown colors. Here you can see Carnelian Skin next to Doombull Brown from the Warhammer color range, and Doombull is simply a much richer, deeper brown. Fortunately, the historical range now adds several new brown tones worth checking out, even if you already own everything from the core Fanatic range. First up is Rifle Brown, which is included in every of the largest sets. It's similar in value to Carnelian Skin, but noticeably more saturated. Pairing beautifully with it is Camo Brown from the German set, a lovely medium orange-red brown. And then there's Boot Brown from the American set, a dark chocolate brown that adds more depth to the flexible brown triad from the core range. You can compare all of these yourself in my Warpaints Fanatic color swatch, which covers the full core and historical ranges as well as the John Blanche sets. Another gap in the core Fanatic range has always been the lack of darker warm reds. The British set addresses this with Bearing Moon, a new dark crimson that nicely expands the warm red flexible triad. Bottom line up front though, these new browns and reds still aren't the most intense and vibrant on the market. But if you want to stay within the Army Painters ecosystem, they're a welcome addition. So that covers the paint selection. Now let's get to the verdict, my recommendation, and of course the finished model. Here's the completed Death Corps Trooper, painted entirely with the Warpaints Historical paint range. The only exception is the base, where I used liquid and dry pigments from AK and Vallejo. Now, Warpaints Fanatic and the historical expansion are good choices for beginners and painters who want to get things done quickly, using techniques like base coating and dry brushing that benefit from their strong covering power. The sets are very well composed. Think of them as unofficial bolt action starter sets. The selection of washes, the steel paint, the rust effect, and all those neutral browns and beiges are useful for almost any setting that involves human factions, not just World War II. Do watch out though, if you already own a lot of core Fanatic range paints. A lot of colors overlap with existing ones, despite having a different name. So do your research before buying, for example with my color swatch. Also keep in mind that about 9 to 10 colors are shared across every of the larger army sets. Now, for the cons. First, the price. Compared to buying 10 or 20 Fanatic paints individually, you save little to nothing and neither get anything extra, and the second wave paint sets have actually gone up in price. Individual historical paint bottles are also mostly only available directly through the Army Painter website. Despite that, I'm giving the sets a solid score of 8, even though the paints themselves, specifically the regular acrylics, are more of a 7 to 7.5 for me. They do hit their limits with advanced techniques, which I was reminded of again when trying to edge highlight the black casing of the weapon on the Death Corps model. That can be a real struggle because the paints dry quickly on the brush tip and lighter colors tend to break apart when thinned. If you want a paint that stays more cohesive when thinned and has a longer working time, I'd point you towards AK 3rd Gen or Vallejo Model Color. Both paint ranges also have palettes geared towards historical miniatures and a more realistic painting style. And both offer plenty of World War II paint sets as well. Not certified by a historian, but also well selected. So make sure to check out my model color review on the right for a comparison. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!